This is all theater. This is all just political theater.
Political theater. Political theater.
Pure political
theater.
Theater.
Political theater.
The nefarious,
Significant and protracted
Political theater for political theater's sake.
I yield back.
From Washington, this is Political Theater, Roll Call's review of the spectacle of politics on Capitol Hill and across the country. I'm Jason Dick. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is a proud alumnus of the University of Louisville, and the school has reciprocated with its own McConnell Center, a nonpartisan political science program at the university. Kentucky's senior senator has not been shy about using the center as a platform for showcasing some of his allies and some of his adversaries in a distinguished speaker series that dates back to 1993. Just this week, McConnell spoke with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Pompeo is currently enmeshed in key elements of the Ukraine saga and a figure in the impeachment investigation into President Donald Trump, happens to be McConnell's preferred candidate to run for Senate in Kansas, where Republican Senator Pat Roberts is retiring. McConnell and Pompeo discuss foreign affairs. They know each other because Pompeo was previously a Kansas congressman, and he's also previously CIA director before his current gig. Niels Lesniewski, our senior Senate reporter here at CQ Roll Call, watched these proceedings, as he does often when the majority leader hosts somebody of note at the McConnell Center. And we're going to talk about not just this, but we're going to talk about how other people have come to the McConnell Center. And McConnell doesn't always have the one-on-one situation that he had with Pompeo this week, but the list of dignitaries, both Democrats, Republicans, and nonpartisan people who have been at the McConnell Center, and McConnell has served as sort of an informal host, even if he does throw to somebody else, is quite long. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Niels, welcome to Political Theater.
It's great to be back, Jason.
So let's talk just first briefly about the discussion that the majority leader had with Mike Pompeo before getting into some of the other folks and some of the sort of context for how they were at the McConnell Center.
Sure. Secretary of State Pompeo was well prepared for an interaction and a two-way exchange on a stage with Mitch McConnell. Certainly, whomever was briefing the secretary on what he might be asked about by McConnell was on top of their game, because Mitch McConnell is probably the only person in that context who is going to ask about Myanmar.
I'm going to go around to a totally different place in the world of special interest to me, and that's
a Louisville question. Here it comes.
that's Burma.
Speaking of former CIA directors or current CIA directors, Pompeo was a CIA director. Looking at this list of distinguished speaker series, Gina Haspel, the current CIA director, was at the McConnell Center just last year after she was confirmed.
Service at CIA is the opportunity to be part of something bigger than yourself, to serve your country in a meaningful and compelling way.
Gina Haspel is also a University of Louisville alumna, so there's another connection there. But this was very interesting, to me, that she appeared there just a couple months after she was confirmed in 2018. And, she had a bit of a rough spot in the confirmation process. McConnell was very dogged in getting her confirmed, even under some criticism of her involvement in the CIA's torture program. Programming note, our previous podcast was about the movie The Report, which was about the Senate Intelligence Committee's report on the CIA's torture report. You can still get that wherever you get your podcasts. It's great. Listen, Niels and I spoke with Daniel Jones, the Senate Intelligence Committee staffer and the director of the movie, The Report, Scott Burns. Anyway, back to today's program, Niels. But Gina Haspel, she got this opportunity to kind of, crack a few jokes, about how Daniel Craig had visited the Langley and showed up in an Aston Martin. She's got this great quip about, that's not really how spies usually operate with a red Aston Martin. And she got to talk about the priorities and that the agency that she leads has. One of those priorities just happens to be the interdiction of opioids. Now, why would that be of interest to somebody in Kentucky?
Well, if you're Senator McConnell and particularly as well out in eastern Kentucky, our old friend Hal Rogers, the congressman from eastern Kentucky for a long time, has been particularly interested in this topic as well. They have just been ravaged in Appalachia by the opioid abuse epidemic. And McConnell, it has been on the list of things that McConnell has prioritized in recent years. Every so often he'll give a floor speech when they're talking about an appropriation bill, and about the only thing he wants to talk about is curbing opioid abuse and expanding production of industrial hemp.
Two parochial issues that come in handy when you're running for re-election, I would assume. And again, I'm not trying to be too cute by half about this. I mean, people. Public servants like to showcase, particularly if they have a showcase like the McConnell Center, which is respected on its own right. They have a scholarship program. This is a respected program. It's not some hack, kind of affiliated sort of thing. But he's bringing in people who are important in the public policy process, and he is able to steer the conversation. Whether that's the conversation that other people want to have, it's almost beside the point. He gets to set the agenda, much like he gets to set the agenda on the floor. So he wants to talk to Mike Pompeo and showcase Pompeo in a fairly positive light. He gets to do that and talk about legit issues. Same thing with Gina Haspel. There's a lot to talk about to a CIA director, especially if people are talking about torture. It's good to steer the conversation if you want it to go somewhere else. One other person that was recently on the list and back in 2017, September 2017, was Neil Gorsuch. Appeared at the McConnell Center. Arguably one of a person who typifies one of McConnell's greatest political successes.
Oh, for sure. Merrick Garland is not going to be going to the McConnell Center anytime soon. That was the federal judge in Washington who was nominated for that Supreme Court seat that Neil Gorsuch was ultimately confirmed to by President Obama. Famously, everyone knows the story by now about how McConnell declared that no one Obama nominated would even be considered to fill the vacancy created by the death of Antonin Scalia.
Back in 2016.
In 2016. President Trump wins the presidency and then, surprisingly enough, nominates Gorsuch, and we move ahead at warp speed, it seemed like, in the Senate to confirm that. That was perhaps the greatest example of a political success on McConnell's part, appearing on this list. Second Supreme Court justice, I believe, to have made an appearance, because Chief Justice Roberts,
correct,
was also a speaker at U of L, and
back in 2009.
Back in 2009, and if you the other group of people who I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about are the number of Democrats that the McConnell Center and this program has brought in, because you may not realize it's always kind of a funny thing about McConnell. McConnell lives in one of the most liberal neighborhoods in the most liberal part of the entire state or Commonwealth of Kentucky. And so, he is a constituent of John Yarmouth, the liberal chairman of the House Budget Committee. But so he brings in Democrats. He's brought in Hillary Clinton. She's brought in Joe Biden.
Yeah, one of the things that I had noticed is the number of presidential candidates. I mean, he brought in Biden in 2011. This is after Biden had won the vice presidency in 2008 with Barack Obama. But he had his affiliation with McConnell went back to the 80s when McConnell was first elected and Biden was already in the Senate. And they have continued this very, sort of collegial and professional and productive relationship.
Now that he's moved to the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, I'm happy to say our working relationship is still strong, as evidenced most recently by our work together on a bipartisan tax bill that preserved lower income tax rates for everyone who pays taxes. It was partly because of that work that the New York Times recently referred to the Vice President as the Uber liaison with the Senate. We still call him Joe.
This appearance by Biden in 2011 was in February of that year. Just a few months later, the vice president and McConnell would get together and avert a catastrophic debt default in the summer of 2011, and then help set the stage for further negotiations on what we called avoiding the fiscal cliff.
Mitch and I come from the same tradition. We have significant disagreements, but we recognize the sincerity and the intellectual grounding of the other man's position and the necessity of finding common ground in a nation that is heterogeneous as ours. And one more thing, never have we said something to one another that we haven't kept our word.
It occurs to me that having people like Biden, having people like Hillary Clinton, it feeds some of the narrative of that some conservatives don't trust McConnell because he's nice to people like Biden and Clinton and Chuck Schumer and Harry Reid, all of whom have been at the McConnell Center.
That's right. Another recent Democratic senator to make an appearance is Tim Kaine from Virginia, who was the vice presidential running mate of Hillary Clinton last go-around. But the two of them, McConnell has a clear objective in working with Senator Kaine at the moment, because the two of them have come together on an attempt to raise the age for cigarette sales to 21 across the country, even though they both come from
Tobacco states. Virginia and Kentucky, where tobacco built those two states. Two commonwealths, sorry.
Yes.
I love calling them commonwealths. It's so great. Some of the other people that I've of note there, Senator Tim Scott appeared in November 2015. He had been appointed to the seat in 2013 to replace Jim DeMint, who left the Senate and became the head of the Heritage Foundation. Tim Scott was the only black Republican in the Senate. Somebody who has a heft to him. When he talks about issues that sometimes Republicans don't feel that comfortable about, with like, say, criminal justice reform or poverty. Senator Joni Ernst, the Republican senator from Iowa, she appeared there, let me just check my notes, in 2016, right before the 2016 election. She is the only woman in Republican leadership currently in the Senate. It would be silly to think that there isn't some strategy going along here too, that McConnell picks people who he can work with, who he gets along with, or that he shows that there is even if they don't agree on a whole lot, they can actually work together, like with Schumer and Reid.
So a lot of these larger events are held in larger venues in and around the University of Louisville campus. But if you visit the center itself, where they're also gathering the McConnell archives, and I have a feeling that years down the road, some of us will spend many, many weeks in the basement of the University of Louisville library trying to figure out what all was going on during particularly this period when those archives are eventually opened. But in that facility, there is an auditorium, and the auditorium is named for none other than Secretary of Transportation and former Secretary of Labor, Elaine Chao.
Yes, Elaine Chao, former Labor Secretary, current Transportation Secretary, also a guest of the Distinguished Speakers Series as well. So this is one of those things that McConnell takes some criticism for. Particularly if there's a highway that gets funded in Kentucky or something like that, there's a lot of aspersion there. But there is a legitimate reason, of course, to have, say, the Transportation Secretary or the Labor Secretary speak to a group of political science students.
That's right, and it's always remarkable to me when the two of them will appear together on the campaign trail at times. That has happened from time to time. When McConnell was last in cycle, I remember going to a parade in the western part of Kentucky in which Senator McConnell and Secretary Chao were riding in the back of a Corvette along a parade route in a fairly small town. And Tom Williams, our photographer and I were running around the parade route as McConnell and Chao were making the rounds.
I do think that, like, again, it's impossible to separate the politics from the policy in here, and that's why, you know, maybe we, as we like start to wrap up, we come back to Pompeo. You know, that there, you know, Pompeo has been a part of the conversation about the Senate, about running for the Senate. Because this is, you know, we just don't know what's going to happen. Like, I mean, like in electorally, we're still, we like to think that we know what's going to happen, but we're still like in a very uncertain period of time right now, and they need the best candidate. Each party, you know, wants the very best candidates they can get. And we've started to see a little softening also, where the president has said, you know, even though he wanted Pompeo to serve out as Secretary of State through the term at least, I mean, he said, well, maybe he would talk to Mike if there's some sort of danger that we might lose the Kansas seat that Pat Roberts is vacating. And so, again, totally legit reason, you know, you'd want like the Secretary of State to appear at your political science, you know, like center, but also there is that political benefit as well. And I don't know if anybody has this sort of talent for bringing those two together and has this sort of infrastructure. I mean, it's the sort of thing, like you said, we'll be going through the archives a lot and looking at this stuff for years to come.
I cannot think of another current senator who has a similar academic infrastructure while they are in office. And it's fascinating that, you know, this started, I believe, in 1991, at which point in time McConnell would have only been serving in the Senate really for a very short period of time in the annals of history, because he was first elected in 1984. And so to already be building up your legacy project at that point in time, and to be able to build the structure to basically educate the next generation of Kentucky political leaders,
who just happened to go on sometimes to staff Mitch McConnell's offices as well.
Before then, a winning statewide election, as we saw in two cases just this year in these off-year elections in Kentucky. And it's another legacy project that certainly is bearing fruit if you're Mitch McConnell.
Yeah, and I do want to mention those two McConnell, you know, sort of acolytes there. The new state attorney general, Daniel Cameron, won pretty easily the attorney general's race against Gregory Stumbo, and then the state secretary of state, Michael Adams, he won a little bit closer race against Heather French Henry, but those are two affiliated with McConnell, and so it's part of the next generation of leaders for them.
And certainly, if you're McConnell, he wants to maintain his hold on the Republican Party in Kentucky and to continue to grow it. It's one of those states where, you know, there was for a long time the Democratic Party, at least infrastructure wise, was dominant, and McConnell has really been the leader in swinging it in the other direction. And this is clearly, you know, while the center itself is nonpartisan and it's a public university, this is certainly still a project that is bearing fruit for the Republicans.
Well, Niels, thanks for walking us through this. Again, this distinguished speaker series. You could go down a wormhole watching some of the videos and the people who have been there, and it's pretty interesting. So thanks for helping walk us through it.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening. You can catch up on previous episodes of this podcast and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. Political Theater is produced by CQ Roll Call, a leader in nonpartisan political and policy news and analysis for more than 70 years. CQ Roll Call is part of Fiscal Note, a global technology and media company.